Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. The White House says President Trump won't rule out the use of military action to acquire Greenland. Europe throws its support behind Denmark, pushing back against the US demands. And crude declines after Trump says Venezuela will hand over oil worth about $2.8 billion. Elsewhere, the record stock rally runs out of steam in Asia. Plus, the UK and France pledge to send troops to Ukraine if a peace deal is struck with Russia, with European leaders hailing progress on US security guarantees. A very good morning to you. Checking in on these markets, and we had US stocks approaching a fresh record yesterday. Looks like Europe's going to try and catch up today. Wall Street to take a breather. And we've had the best start to a year for Asian stocks ever so far. But that too has hit a wall today. That's partly because of the tensions between Japan and China. Now, what are the risk events today that could change this picture? Well, we've got Eurozone inflation numbers coming at 10 a.m. London time, or should I say disinflation numbers. That story expected to continue. And the raft of US economic data continues as well. Will it change the outlook for the Fed's path ahead? Could that power US stocks even higher? Let's set you up for the working day. We begin with our top story. The White House says Donald Trump will not rule out using military force to take control of Greenland, standing firm that acquiring the island is a national security priority. US Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt says the president's considering many ways of achieving his goal. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Rosalind Matheson for more. Ros, you've had Secretary of State Marco Rubio playing down the threat of military action in contrast to what we've heard from the White House. Is that ambiguity deliberate, actually? Does that make us think that an attack's even more likely?
Well, this is very much an administration that doesn't like to rule anything in or out. They like to keep everybody on their toes. Donald Trump changes his mind, changes his tune, and that's probably very deliberate, again, to keep everybody guessing. You know, there are obviously some hawks in the administration who are saying perhaps we could have a go at Greenland through military force. There are others who are saying, let's be much more pragmatic and realistic here. And this is about perhaps acquiring Greenland, buying it in a way as if it's for sale. But it's certainly an appreciation. It's a much more complicated question in a way than Venezuela. It's different to going in and grabbing a dictator from a country. This is, you know, Greenland is a democracy. It has elections, has elected government, and most people who are polled in Greenland do not want to be governed by the US. In fact, if anything, the question would be eventually potentially towards independence. So would the US strategy be more about fostering the independence movement, and as part of that, negotiating arrangements around access to natural resources, greater US military presence in Greenland? I mean, obviously, Donald Trump is quite fixated on Greenland. He talks about it a lot. He thinks about it a lot. And we do have to take him seriously. He has said and done things that people didn't think he would say or do. That's why people are so concerned, you know, in Europe, obviously, as well. So it does have to be taken seriously. But there's no sign of military preparations going on here, at least for now. And as Marco Rubio was saying, there are all sorts of options on the table here.
So what's been the European response, apart from outrage and saying, you know, you've got to respect our territory?
Well, there was that joint statement expressing outrage and saying you've got to respect Greenland's territory, and that was from the leaders of the UK, Germany, France, and so on. And obviously, there is a high level of concern that Donald Trump could yet do something, but it's also bundled up in the concerns more broadly around the future of NATO, because Donald Trump has been quite critical of NATO in the past. He used to really criticise European nations for not doing enough around their defence. So NATO's been a bit wobbly on and off, and obviously doing something on Greenland would rupture potentially NATO completely. And then you've got that security alliance that's held Europe together for decades collapsing to the advantage potentially of Russia. So there are big things here that, you know, Europe is obviously concerned about. What can they do about it? Well, they can certainly warn about it, but does it start to bleed into other areas of the relationship? I mean, we're still trying to get a peace deal from Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but there are broader issues around economics, trade, investment, and so on. Does the trade relationship get pulled into this, also where there's real money at stake, and perhaps Europe, can take a stronger stance against the US when it comes to trade. So there are some levers to pull. The question is Europe willing to pull them? But probably for now, they're just hoping that this rhetoric will die down again when it comes to Greenland, and they can leave it be, well, at least for now.
That's a big hope. Ros, thank you so much. Good to start the day with you. Rosalind Matheson there. Well, turning to the market impact of some of the geopolitics, we've had oil declining after President Trump said that Venezuela will send the US as much as 50 million barrels of oil, worth up to $2.8 billion, which would then be sold with the proceeds to benefit both countries. Bloomberg energy reporter Stephen Stapczynski joins me now with more. Stephen, I wonder how significant this is politically and economically, and whether the business is actually likely to go to Chevron if it's got this small fleet heading to Venezuela now.
Yeah, I mean, I think first let's look at where is this oil going to come from, right? He said as much as 50 million barrels, but he did say sanctioned oil, which I think indicates it might not be the Chevron share. So Chevron is able to operate, they produce about 25% of Venezuela's oil, and they've got a waiver, so they're not sanctioned. So this is likely the other supply that comes out of the country. Now, the other big question is it the oil that's already on the water? There's a bunch of sanctioned vessels that are on the water. Is it the supply that's going to be coming out over the next few weeks and months? Venezuela produces 800,000 barrels a day, so 50 million would be 50 to 60 days worth of oil production. Now, in terms of your first question, what does this mean geopolitically? This is likely, an olive branch from the current Venezuelan government. Of course, we have to confirm that this is actually happening. These are just Trump's words. But it does show that they're doing steps to make him happy, to give the oil to the U.S., which appears to not be going to their main buyer of the sanctioned oil, which would be China. Now, economically, this isn't huge, right? It's just a couple months' worth of oil production. This doesn't mean that Trump is going to be getting back the oil that he says were taken from U.S. companies when they were nationalized over the last few decades by different governments in Venezuela. But again, geopolitically, this is the starting point of where Trump wants to go, which is securing oil for the U.S. and making money off of this deal.
OK, Stephen, thank you so much for that. Bloomberg's Stephen Stapczynski there. We're checking in on commodities now, and we've seen gold dropping as traders have been looking past the geopolitical risk to the US data. Lots of it coming out this week. Gold there weak at 0.8%. Silver down 2.5% almost. But as you look as well to nickel, it's been dropping off that 19-month high. The metals rally, as you can see on this screen, really taking a breather. Turning now to how broader markets are digesting all this. And the geopolitics, as I say, didn't really stop US stocks hitting a fresh high yesterday. Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel's here with more. And Val, it seems like traders are more focused on not just the eco data, but tech, the story there.
Yeah, yesterday's rally was impressive. It was broad, so it wasn't just about tech. Yes, we had the S&P 500 higher by 0.6%, but the equal weight counterpart of the index was more than double that. It was up more than 1.2%. So tech, yes, that was an important driver, but yeah, small caps also outperformed yesterday as well. Now, when we do talk about tech, there was, again, some surprising moves when it comes to memory chips. Memory chips were one of the best performers of 2025, and they're continuing out of the gates very strongly this year. The likes of Micron was up 10% in the session yesterday. Others like SanDisk, Western Digital, Seagate, some of the biggest pulls higher on the S&P 500 index, and all comes down to Jensen Huang's comments, the Nvidia CEO, saying that the memory market is an underserved market and that the storage needs for AI are going to be gigantic. So this is putting a lot of pressure on the storage market, which already people are worried about a shortage this year. We had the likes of Samsung even announcing that they are about to hike prices when it comes to their storage data as well. On top of all of this, we want to talk about maybe the possibility of this tech rally being disrupted. I do want to add another risk event onto the calendar this week, and that comes on Friday, perhaps after the non-farm payroll report. We do have the Supreme Court sitting for opinions, Lizzie, and with this tariff case pending, the fact that they have rushed this Supreme Court decision, we're likely to get an opinion on tariffs on Friday. That could lead to quite an unstable market on Friday. The Supreme Court decision will have many nuances for the market to look through, but the market's kind of the conclusion they want to make now is if IEEPA is struck down and some of these tariffs have to be paid back, that's bad for the U.S. deficit, and we could see treasuries weaken and yield rise on the back of that. And we did have a glimpse of that in the session yesterday.
Yeah, how do you pay for all those tax cuts if you don't have the tariffs? Bloomberg's Valerie Teitel flagging that risk event for us later in the week. Now let's turn to the market that's already trading. Asia, of course. Winnie Xu is in Hong Kong with an update. And Winnie, what's happening where you are?
Yeah, morning, Lizzie. We are seeing a bit of a pullback in Asian stocks today, especially after that strong start of the year. And we're talking about MSCI Asia actually right now trading in the overbought territory, first time since October. However, leading losses today, as you can see, are Chinese stocks traded in Hong Kong and also Japanese stocks due to that escalating tension between Japan and China. Now that China says that it's going to impose bans on these military use items to Japan. And you flip the board and take a look at how that's affecting different sectors in our region. You can see on top of the board are these Japanese car makers, including Toyota, Honda, taking a hit because of these concerns around supply chains when it comes to rare earth. However, the rare earth related stocks in the region from Japan to Australia are actually gaining because of the expected better business opportunities for these companies outside of China. Now you flip the board as we also want to take a look at another interesting sector, which is the memory chip sector that we've been talking about just now. And in Asia, you can see that the likes of SK Hynix, Samsung, and also Japan's Kioxia are rising due to these bullish comments from Nvidia's Jensen Huang about that strong demand for storage and memory. However, the concerns around the current shortage for these memory chips are actually weighing on some of these stocks, including Sony and Nintendo, due to the concerns for higher prices. And these companies rely a lot on these chips for their devices. Back to you, Lizzie.
All right, Winnie Xu in Hong Kong, thank you so much for that. Well, tech will be a big theme of this programme, but we're also going to turn back to geopolitics next. European leaders hailing progress towards an agreement on US security guarantees in Ukraine. We'll get you the details. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says that Ukraine's allies have made significant progress on a plan to end Russia's war in Ukraine. European officials hailed developments as an important breakthrough during a Coalition of the Willing meeting in Paris.
And we think we've made a lot of progress. We heard President Zelensky and some of the other people here talking about land options. That will be the most critical issue, and that's subject, and we're going to be continuing with those discussions, and hopefully we'll be able to meet or come up with certain compromises with regard to that. But I do want to say this. We are here to mediate and help in the peace process, and we're prepared to do anything necessary to get to that place.
This is a vital part of our ironcast commitment to stand with Ukraine for the long term. It paves the way for the legal framework under which British, French and partner forces could operate on Ukrainian soil, securing Ukraine's skies and seas and regenerating Ukraine's armed forces for the future.
For analysis, we're joined now by Greg Sullivan, Bloomberg's Russia economy and government editor. Morning, Greg. So we heard big talk there from Ukraine's allies. What exactly are they offering Kyiv?
Well, that's right. Leaders hailed progress made in talks to end the war. Specifically, European leaders praised an alignment between the U.S., Europe, and Ukraine on security guarantees. Now, details were not ample during the talks, but there does appear to be an agreement for a multinational force to help provide that security guarantee for Ukraine. Separately, the French and the U.K. pledged to send troops as part of any multinational force if peace is reached. German Chancellor Merz appeared to leave the door open to German participation. But beyond that, the contours of such a force are not immediately clear. What we do know is that the U.S. will be involved in monitoring any truce or ceasefire through intelligence sharing, and did commit to try to help with any reassurances. But again, the security guarantee component has been very important for Kyiv and its allies. They do not want Russia to simply be able to restart hostilities in the case of peace actually being reached.
But Greg, will Russia's Vladimir Putin see this security backstop as tantamount to NATO membership? And therefore, is he likely to agree to peace at all? Does it just look like diplomatic posturing from the coalition of the willing?
That is a great point. That is a very important point. Previously, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ruled out the presence of NATO troops on Ukrainian soil after the conflict ends. This has been a red line for him, the NATO joining NATO. So it's unclear that he would accept this. In fact, Putin has shown no willingness to walk away from his demands thus far, and no willingness to really offer concessions to reach peace. So it does beg the question of what these security guarantees also exactly mean. Furthermore, there's still the outstanding issue of territory. Moscow is demanding parts of eastern Ukraine that they have not been able to capture militarily. They have not walked away from those demands or softened those demands. And that has been a red line for Kyiv, not wanting to cede territory that it still controls. So a huge sticking point there. And no clarity on whether Russia would actually accept the security guarantee agreements that the Europeans, U.S., and Ukraine have appeared to have reached.
OK, so a lot of progress, but the crux of the issue seems still to remain. Bloomberg's Greg Sullivan, thank you so much for that analysis. Well, coming up on the programme, we'll turn back to tech. Jensen Huang saying it'll be a very good year for Nvidia as the company raises expectations of more bumper demand for its AI chips. Details next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now, Nvidia says that an upbeat revenue forecast delivered in October has only become brighter due to strong demand. It comes as the AI chip leader and Siemens announced an expansion of their partnership using AI to transform industrial systems. They plan to launch the first fully AI-driven manufacturing sites this year. Nvidia CEO Jensen Huang and the Siemens CEO Roland Busch spoke to Bloomberg about that collaboration.
We're announcing a big partnership between us. We've known each other for a long time, but the partnership we're announcing is really a big deal. One, we're accelerating their EDA software. We're accelerating their simulation software. We're integrating AI technology, physical AI and agentic AI, into their team center and their factory automation operating system. And so we're working together across this entire spectrum. When we accelerate the software, then we'll get to use it to design our chips and systems. When we accelerate their simulation software, we'll use it in our AI factories to simulate the thermal properties of our AI factories. When we integrate our automation and agentic systems into their AI industrial operating system, we can then use it in our factory floors with our partners, for example, Foxconn. And so we're working across this entire spectrum together, and we're going to put the technology to use basically as soon as we can.
What's the net effect for you, Jensen? Is it improves margins, efficient capital allocation? I know that might sound a bit dry, but actually right now that's the answer everyone's searching for. How has this investment in AI and use of the technology actually changed things in the real world for me?
Well, we announced yesterday Vera Rubin. It takes 6 different chips to integrate into this incredible system called Vera Rubin. And when you're done, each one of these Vera Rubin GPUs is 240,000 watts. And it is 10 times more energy efficient than the last generation. It is 10 times more cost efficient than the last generation. But it's still, the technology is insanely complicated. 15,000 engineering years came together to build this system. And so when we accelerate EDA tools, when we accelerate simulation tools, and when we can eventually, and I'm hoping very soon, design entire Vera Rubin systems inside a Siemens digital twin, the ability for us to create much, much more complex systems will scale. We'll do it much more efficiently. And so this is really about being able to do the impossible and being able to do it the impossible right the first time.
And let me add, once we then realize that AI creates real-world impact, this is where it really deploys the full power and also the economic power. It's not only in the data centers or in AI factories, which we see, but also on the edge, because once you start inferencing with low latency, you bring this technology to the edge. There's a huge potential for our customers to deploy this technology, and this includes, of course, hardware. Where we come from the chips. It goes into the controllers. Some of our controllers run on GPUs.
Yes.
And then it goes all the way to the
call it industrial PC.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And we
now these industrial PCs are AI industrial PCs.
We supercharge it, and they can now run algorithms trained in the cloud. They can run it on the shop floor and do all that trick, what we talked about it in real-time optimization and running in a plant. And that makes a huge difference.
The CEOs of Siemens and Nvidia, Roland Busch and Jensen Huang, speaking exclusively to our colleague Ed Ludlow there on the sidelines of CES in Las Vegas. Now let's get to some other top corporate stories we're following this morning. The Nvidia CEO has also said that he isn't concerned about a billionaire's tax under consideration in his home state of California. The world's 9th richest person says he's, quote, perfectly fine with it. Under a proposed ballot initiative in the state, billionaires would face a one-time 5% levy to cover funding shortages for healthcare, food assistance and education. Elsewhere, AMD shares closed lower yesterday, despite CEO Lisa Su's comments that demand is soaring. Speaking to Bloomberg, Su said that more widespread use of artificial intelligence in 2026 will help overcome the concerns of some investors.
We like to say that AI is really going to be everywhere, and it's really for everyone. And it's for each one of us to make our businesses more productive, each one of us more productive, going forward. And so we're still in the very early innings of really unlocking the power of AI.
And Elon Musk's XAI has completed a $20 billion funding round with investors including Nvidia and the Qatar Investment Authority. XAI says that the financing will accelerate infrastructure build-out and deliver AI products. That includes the chatbot Grok, which has caused some alarm among some regulators for allowing users to generate images of people undressed by AI without their consent. Well, coming up, Venezuela emboldens President Trump in his pursuit of Greenland, but does it leave Ukraine struggling to be heard? We'll discuss that potential conflict in geopolitics next. This is Bloomberg. Live from London, this is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. I'm Lizzie Burden with your top stories. The White House says President Trump won't rule out the use of military action to acquire Greenland. Europe throws its support behind Denmark, pushing back against the US demands. Crude declines after Trump says Venezuela will hand over oil worth about $2.8 billion. Elsewhere, the record stock rally runs out of steam in Asia. Plus, the UK and France pledged to send troops to Ukraine if a peace deal is struck with Russia, with European leaders hailing progress on US security guarantees. Welcome to the programme. If you're just joining us, it's 6:30 a.m. here in London, and the markets picture looks like this. We had nearly a record for US stocks yesterday. US stocks looking to take a bit of a breather today, but Europe looking to catch up if the futures picture is to be believed. We had the best start of the year ever for Asian stocks, but that rally hitting a bit of a wall this morning because of the Japan-China tensions. Now let's take a look at the front pages this morning. They've got a geopolitical flavour again, as you might expect. The Financial Times leading on President Trump saying that Venezuela will relinquish as many as 50 million barrels of oil to the US, and that's to be sold at market prices. If we flip over to the Wall Street Journal, they're also on the geopolitics, but they're focusing on the US Secretary of State Marco Rubio telling lawmakers that Trump's threats against Greenland didn't signal an imminent invasion. The goal's still to buy it, even though the White House itself won't rule out taking the territory by force. So that's the Journal. And here in Europe, we look at the Times of London. That has the UK and France agreeing to boots on the ground in Ukraine if a peace deal can be reached. The British Prime Minister Keir Starmer saying that an end to the 4-year conflict is now closer than ever. You can get a roundup of all the stories you need to know to get your day going by looking at today's edition of Daybreak. Terminal subscribers can find it by going to DAYB Go. Well, the United States, as we say, has escalated a dispute with Denmark over Donald Trump's pursuit of Greenland, ramping up the rhetoric after ousting Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. And the threat over Greenland's future has really overshadowed the talks to boost security for Ukraine as European leaders sound the alarm on the island's sovereignty. Well, joining me now to tie all these threads together is University of Essex government professor Natasha Lindstaedt. So really good to have you with us this morning, Natasha. When you listen to these threats when it comes to Greenland and contrast the position coming from the White House, not ruling out the use of military action, with what we're hearing from Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, who do you believe and how imminent is the threat to Greenland?
So I think that we have to take seriously that the U.S. could invade. And I think that's part of what this administration has done with their foreign policy that is a huge departure from past U.S. administrations, in that they are trying to create uncertainty and confusion about what they're going to do. They seem to have different ideas of what they might do, something like a good cop, a bad cop. You have some like Marco Rubio, as you mentioned, saying that they were just trying to purchase Greenland. And of course, Trump has been acting like an invasion is possible. And that's the same thing that happened in Venezuela, where they were talking about regime change, possibly a land invasion, while others were saying, no, that wasn't going to happen. And as a result, the rest of the world is sort of on their toes, not really sure what's going to happen. And I think Trump thinks he can use that to his advantage, because that way he can use that as leverage to get some sort of deals done. Now, in his first administration, he was really mostly all bark and no bite. It was really a lot of bluster, and no one really took him that seriously because he would often back down from threats. But we've seen with this administration, with this summer's attack on Iran's nuclear sites, the actual attack and kidnapping of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, that he is willing to take action. And I think that's why some of these other countries, like Panama, that's worried about an attack on its Panama Canal, and especially Greenland, are worried that he could actually take the territory by force. And if not, he's going to really try to get some kind of concession out of Greenland that he sees favorable to the U.S.
Well, so you wonder what can be done about this. And if you have one NATO member threatening another, how strong is NATO without the US against the US?
It's not strong because NATO is really built around U.S. military power. And without the U.S. fully involved, fully committed to NATO, it will really disintegrate. It will not have the same meaning as it had in the past. And this is really critical to the post-war security arrangement that NATO was this collective security group that could deter threats from outside of NATO. Now the biggest threat is coming from within, with the US, which is obviously the biggest military within NATO. And that's why the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, is saying that if the US were to attack Greenland, that would signal the end of NATO, or would be the end of NATO. There's no way that it could really exist after that.
And do you think that Europe would put Ukraine before Greenland if it came to it, because of the money, frankly, but also so as not to antagonize Washington?
I think what they're going to be trying to do now, they have different diplomacy tracks that they'll be working on pretty much nonstop, because the Danish Prime Minister said she's going to do everything in her power to prevent an attack on Greenland. That's going to require a lot of diplomatic action with the US. And at the same time, Europe does have to focus on Ukraine, because Russia is so near to Europe. It's proximate to many different countries within Europe and poses a huge threat to European security. So at the moment, European security advisors are just working nonstop to deal with both issues, alongside also the issue of Venezuela.
And so, of course, this is front of mind because of what's happened in Venezuela, the decapitation of the Maduro regime. Is it wishful thinking, Professor, of the European Commission to downplay comparisons between what's happened in Venezuela and what could happen in Greenland?
Well, I think that they just have to try to maintain an image of strength, and they're worried about, what could happen. So I think you have, of course, in the Venezuelan case, a country that was led by a dictator that had engaged in all kinds of human rights abuses and is the richest country in the world in terms of oil reserves. And so these are really very different cases. Venezuela has almost 30 million people and is dealing with a lot of different issues. In the case of Greenland, this is a territory. It is rich in rare earth minerals. This is why it is attractive to Donald Trump. He claims that he needs to take over Greenland for security reasons, but there could be some possibility of making a deal there with that.
And when it comes to Venezuela, how long do you see this government run by Delcy Rodriguez, the acting president, but run from Washington? How long do you see that holding up? How long can it last?
So these are good questions that we really don't know the answer to. There's just so many unknowns as to how long this operation is going to last, whether there will need to be U.S. boots on the ground, how much is this going to cost the U.S., and whether the Venezuelan people are going to accept this new situation with the U.S. supposedly in control, but Delcy Rodriguez in the interim. I think the other big question is the role of the military. I mean, the military is going to play, the Venezuelan military, I should say, they're going to play a hugely important role in ensuring stability. If they decide to go against the U.S., if they decide to defect, or if there are members of the military that want to take matters into their own hands, we're going to start to see a complete deterioration of stability on the ground in Venezuela. And this is already a country that has dealt with a lot of instability, incredibly high crime rates, and violent non-state actors that, like guerrilla groups like the ELN that guard the border region with Colombia. So, I mean, this is an incredibly dangerous and uncertain situation in the weeks to come, to see how well the Maduro regime accepts things, accepts U.S. being in charge. And what would probably most helpful is they lay out some kind of framework for when elections will be held, because that will provide some certainty to many different actors involved.
Well, thank you so much for coming on and sharing those insights with us. That's University of Essex government professor Natasha Lindstaedt. Thank you so much. Well, coming up on the programme, we'll talk about how all of that geopolitics should be influencing your portfolio. How should investors position around it all? That conversation coming up with WisdomTree's Aneeka Gupta next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Daybreak Europe. Now to some other stories from around the world. Iranian police have clashed with protesters in Tehran's main market and a hospital. That, as activists say, the death toll from the unrest has climbed to at least 29 people. The protests have so far divided Iran's leadership over how to respond, the president describing protesters' demands as legitimate, while the judiciary chief is warning of swift trials for protesters. Staying in the Middle East, and Saudi Arabia is opening stock investment to all foreigners in the kingdom's latest effort to boost flows and revive a market which has lagged peers. The Saudi Capital Market Authority says it's removed all requirements on foreigners, such as having at least $500 million in assets under management. Non-residents will be able to invest directly starting next month. And US President Donald Trump has implored Republicans to turn around their political fortunes ahead of the November midterm elections. He's warning that if Democrats retake control of Congress, he'll be impeached for a third time. Trump's warning comes as polls show that Americans are dissatisfied with his leadership and the state of the economy. Well, staying with geopolitics, our next guest says that Venezuela's regime change is unlikely to move the global growth needle by itself, but could reshape the energy landscape at the margin with knock-on effects for commodities and equities. Aneeka Gupta, Director of Macroeconomics Research at WisdomTree, I'm pleased to say, joins us now. Good morning to you. So we've got a new leader, but it seems like the same old repression tactics. How do you position as an investor around the decapitation of the Maduro regime? Good morning, Aneeka.
Very good morning. Yes, I mean, we're seeing this as quite a major geopolitical moment. But if you look closely, I think there are three key transmission channels into the financial markets that are playing out following this event. The first is, via oil and commodity markets. The second is inflation and the subsequent interest rate expectations that are likely to follow. And the third is we're seeing this sector and style leadership start to develop in equity markets. So, one of the opportunities we have seen subsequent to this event taking place is via oil prices. We have seen the US large cap integrated energy companies actually stand to benefit from this particular situation. So we're seeing, allocations towards high dividend US portfolios, giving you a much more meaningful allocation to the energy sector and the industrial sector. And those two have been performing a lot better subsequent to this geopolitical event. I think another interesting way to position is via defense. And, this does also have key implications for the European defense sector. It reinstates that conviction within European governments to actually stick to those long-term budgets. It hardens their resolves to meet NATO's now new 5% GDP target. And I think we're seeing that develop across the European defense contractors as well.
Mm. Well, turning to that oil impact that you mentioned, Aneeka, how long do you think it's going to take, first of all, to get these US companies to invest in Venezuelan energy infrastructure, second, to produce more oil, third, for that to lower oil prices, and finally, for it to really benefit consumers in the US?
Yeah, I think it's really going to be a long-term play. We're coming into 2026 where we do have an ample supply situation in the oil market. And as you know, Venezuela holds around 300 billion barrels of reserves. And clearly, if US companies are eventually allowed to invest and the output subsequently rises, while demand remains quite subdued, prices could face structural downward pressure over time. So I think it is a bit of a medium to long-term story in terms of how soon those barrels come back into the market. But for now, what the energy markets are likely to be exposed to is a lot more volatility given the sequence of events that have taken place.
Well, the other big geopolitical risk that we've been discussing this morning and throughout the week is around Greenland, of course. And if you did see the US trying to seize Greenland, if we need to take Trump not just seriously but literally, what would happen to the dollar?
I think a reaction function of the dollar would be the dollar is likely to strengthen. Most of the factors as we're looking into 2026 are indicating the dollar is likely to trade in a softer territory, not as deep as we saw in terms of the depreciation that it faced in 2025. But the fact that we're likely to see the Fed easing in 2026, a weaker labor market, that does, and obviously, the strain from the fiscal policy in the US, the dollar is likely to trade a lot weaker in 2026. However, should we see this, such a major geopolitical event take place, that would reinstate, a bid for safe haven assets, and that could also bid up the dollar in that environment.
And does the idea that President Xi could, because of all of this, be emboldened to attack Taiwan, put you off Asia and Asian tech as a result?
2025 has been a fantastic year for emerging markets. And if you look deep within emerging markets, it's been the tech players within Korea and Taiwan that really dominate the market that have outperformed. So it wasn't a story of India outperforming. It actually reversed, and the key tech players being China, Korea, and Taiwan were the dominant players. Now, should we see geopolitical risks are rising across the globe? So it's very difficult to cherry pick. I think investors are naturally hedging against these rising geopolitical risks by investing in defense globally. But to take those chips off the table and not invest in Korea, Taiwan, or China that actually hold dominance in the high bandwidth market would be a difficult proposition.
OK, just finally, Valerie Teitel was flagging for us the risk that the US Supreme Court could, of course, strike down Trump's tariffs later on this week. If that happens, when you've got the tax cuts funded by tariffs, how much would that add to your concerns about US borrowing and for treasuries too?
Absolutely. So there are two angles to this. The first is we're expecting, as a beneficiary of the tax cuts, we're expecting a bit of relief for the middle-income consumer in the U.S., and that was, one of the factors we were using to dictate a bit of uplift towards growth in the U.S. Now, should we see, those tax cuts come into question or higher fiscal strains in the U.S. equity market, that could again reinstate those concerns on fiscal policy, and again have a more of a downward implication for the US dollar. But it remains a very important factor because should we see tariffs have been front and center in 2025, and should that come off the table, that could renew a new leg of events for financial markets as well.
OK, Aneeka, really good to see you. Thank you so much. Aneeka Gupta there, Director of Macroeconomics Research at WisdomTree. Thank you. Well, turning back to CES, the tech conference and many conversations having come out of it so far, Samsung has warned that memory chip supply shortages will raise prices across the electronics industry, including potentially among its own consumer products. We spoke exclusively with Samsung's President and Chief Marketing Officer in Las Vegas.
I think in 2026, there's going to be issues around semiconductor supplies, right? And it's going to affect everyone, not just Samsung. I think it's an industry-wide reality that we're going to see some supply issues with semiconductors. Right? So that will certainly have an impact on all the connected devices that we make with the memories and so forth. But I think we're in a better place than most of other constituents in the industry just because of the scale of the business that we run on a global basis.
What will the strategy be if you need to implement those price hikes?
Well, I think, and again, this is going to affect us the same way, right? When memory prices go up, it's going to have an impact on the price of products, right? So I don't think we're immune to those issues.
When are we going to see that transfer?
Prices are going up, even as we speak. So, obviously we don't want to convey that burden to the consumers, but we're going to be at a point where we have to actually consider repricing our products.
So, as we're seeing now these price hikes come through, not only in Samsung, but also, of course, among other device makers, what's your demand outlook for the year, especially given that companies like Samsung as well have suffered from tariffs last year?
I'm a member of our digital experience division, where we make end products like mobile phones, TVs, and home appliances. You know, these are industries that are expecting to see a modest growth. But I think just looking at our outlook of the business, I think we're going to be able to outpace the market.
How will it compare to last year, especially given that it's a challenging base? You saw a lot of people preempting purchases because of the tariffs.
I think we're going to be doing okay. Yeah, I think we're more optimistic about the outlook of 2026 than what we have experienced last year.
In what devices and sectors?
Yes.
In which sectors?
Mobile phones. I mean, I think with the emergence of AI, I think people are looking at upgrading their products. Be able to leverage the new technologies that are embedded into our products.
When it comes to the price hikes, how difficult is it for you to market to customers?
I can't say it will not have an impact, but obviously we're trying not to pass that burden to the customers as much as we can.
Samsung's president and chief marketing officer speaking to Bloomberg there. We've got plenty more coming up. This is Bloomberg. In our last few minutes here, a few charts to set you up for the day. We've had a tech theme through the programme because of the CES conference in Las Vegas. And you can see here some of the marquee tech names have been pretty left behind when it comes to the rally in US stocks. CES was really the chance to change that with the product launches, but it doesn't seem like they've had much luck so far. Flip the board over. We played you a bit of that interview with Jensen Huang, the Nvidia boss, of course, and he had the warning that you could see a bit of a a big need for memory. And you can see that rally here for the memory names turbocharged. In fact, SanDisk, the white line, up 1,000% more than since its April position last year. It was the best performer on the S&P 500 yesterday. Just finally flip the board over, and because of that, because of the potential shortages when it comes to memory chips, Samsung has warned of price rises. So this could even affect some of its own consumer products as well. You can find all of these charts on the terminal, but coming up next and later today, the Pulse will be speaking with the Deputy Speaker of the Danish Parliament about the rising tensions between the US and Greenland. That's at 9:45 a.m. The opening trade's up next. This is Bloomberg.